Yeah, collected some carbon credits if we got bits of area and whatnot to be able to make itself long-term more sustainable. So I'm Chris Irons, I'm Waitomo branch chair for Waitomo, the Federated Farmers. Welcome here tonight. Just quick health and safety. There is the exit out the door you come in. Behind you out the ranch sliders, the doors over here. Toilets, if you need toilets, are in behind the signs over here. There is a couple of sign-in sheets that will be handed around. If you haven't signed in, can you please have your name on there, just in case, well, COVID and all the rest. We just want to make sure that if someone is a spreader or something, you can track this. That's about it, yeah. If you've got a cell phone, well, the bar's not open tonight, so we can't ask you to shout a beer if it rings, but can you please have it on silent or turned off? If there is an emergency, a fire or an earthquake or something like that, assembly point is in the car park. And if there is a fire, please call 111 and there is fire extinguishers that's located in the kitchen. If you think there are a fire outside, I'll make sure everyone gets out. I'll chase you out one way or another. Also, just a little thing, we are recording it. And it is going to be live streamed on Facebook, so we can hopefully get a few more people that can't make it tonight to be able to watch it. So with all that sort of paperwork and formalities out, that sort of stuff out of the road, maybe do more and more of this stuff. Thank you very much for coming. We've got apologies from Lanier Robinson for Waitomo. He can't make it tonight. Is that all our apologies we've got? As far as I'm right, we'll begin with our panellists. Tonight we've got William Beetham, who is our Federated Farmers Meat and Wool National Chair, all the way up from Wairarapa. We've got John Paul Pratt from Ground Truth, Director, and then we've got Gary Fletcher from near Waikato. So they're all going to give us a bit of a 10-minute outline on their side of things, and then we'll have some questions and answers at the end. So please hold your questions and think about them, and then we'll get into the questions once they're all finished. So first off, cab off ramp, we'll go on William Beetham. Welcome to the mighty Waitomo. Thank you.
Right, good evening. So my name's William Beetham. I'm the Meat and Wool Chair for Federated Farmers nationally and on the national board. I'm also the spokesperson for skills and training and understudy for Andrew Hoggard in terms of forestry. So Andrew said that I could come up here and speak to you guys being a sheep and beef farmer and probably more associated with the carbon farming thing and the impacts in the Wairarapa. So I'll just give you a quick run over and just talk about concerns. But then I'd like to just talk about the opportunities, because carbon farming and the regulatory framework that exists at this point in time is a real challenge for our industry. Right? If you're a sheep and beef farmer and you didn't understand that or know that, it might not have happened in your community or you're under a bit of a rock. What other areas have been a huge impact? Entire communities have been sold forestry that's gone into carbon farming, and that's not assisting any part of the community. There's been long-term concerns raised about not only the loss of communities, but what is the environmental impact of a tree that's effectively, or a monoculture of trees that are occupying a large area of land. They could be subject to disease, they could just fall over and that creates erosion. Disease, fire, again, the biggest issue though is the loss of community and loss of income to our rural communities. So when we're talking about the loss of income to our rural communities, our fantastic team gave me some data to talk about. So there's some information that's come out today from Beetham Land, but I'll also talk about there's going to be some future reports coming out, but there was some analysis that's coming out of that information. So if we looked at just particularly this Waitomo area, so class 6 to 8 land, there is 153,000 hectares I've been told here, out of pastoral land area that's 240,500 hectares. So if we're looking at estimated job losses, agriculture is the largest sector in Waitomo, producing 17% of the district's GDP. The estimated job losses of whether it's 25%, 50% or 100% of Waitomo's 6 to 8 class dry stock land converted to permanent carbon forestry. So what we're looking here is the number of jobs that could be lost under 25%. Is and so the total number of jobs or employees, sorry, I've got to drop that here, is in the region is 4,600 people. That's a population of Waitomo is 9,300 with 4,600 people in full-time employment and 1,600 in part-time. So 25% of that land I talked about, 6 to 8 going in, that's 615 jobs gone. At 15%, that's 1,229 jobs, and at 100%, that's 2,458 jobs gone, or 45%. So carbon forestry, if it moves into this area significantly, could have a massive effect on this community. The opportunity for sheep and beef farms is probably what, so that's a real negative aspect of what we're seeing at the potentially regulatory framework we're at the moment, which Federated Farmers is constantly working on to talk about how we can get better outcomes. What we've done, I talk about our own farming situation at this point in time. This is me and my son looking over probably the largest area that we've worked on our property. What we've looked at is how can we become, take advantage of certainly becoming carbon neutral within our business and working on whilst working on erosion control, biodiversity and other aspects to really add value to our business to try and get out in front of this opportunity and create an opportunity out of foresting our business without reducing our production. No, it's not. We just look over. Please look pretty quick. So the idea of creating that's quite an evening. There we go. That's cool. Is that working? That's right. Oh, we can just talk. So the idea of it is working. Can we flip that one? Sorry. The idea of creating a mosaic, across our rural communities and integrating bush and integrating trees and natural bush for production. So if we're looking back through this area in our business, what we've done is that we've got a large area of that's called the cookie slip. This is our cookie area, cookie block. We've done a lot of drainage work through there, and then planted our erosion control planting. So they're specifically designed to be able to fit within the ETS. Now, who knows where the He-Wok NOAA program is going to go, but that gives us an advantage to capture carbon there whilst controlling erosion on our property. And as you can see, the other slip on the other side of the river is done the same. So what we're actually looking here on the left-hand side, which you can't quite see properly, that's all fenced out in a hardwood block, space planted hardwoods designed for organic posts to go into the into vineyards. They can be harvested every 10 years, hopefully, that's the plan. And they can be space grazed, so they're space planted so they can be grazed with sheep in between them. So it's just thinking about how we can, flip over the next one, how we can integrate trees into areas of our business and not reduce our sheep and beef production. Actually, this has been going on in our business and our property for 3 generations, or didn't want to flick over to it. Oh, sorry about that. So these trees here were actually planted by my father, and the ones you can just see on the top right were planted by my grandfather under a land management plan that we've been working on for 3 generations across our business. But basically, initially it was focused on erosion control. Now we're looking at different types of biodiversity, including biodiversity. We can flick over now. It goes over. And I suppose this is just looking down our farm, thinking about how we can have an integration of trees and different types of trees into our business. And then by focusing on the different types of land classes, so we've got our hill country in the front, our flat areas being high produced, and actually all the bush you see in the background, which is actually just looking in the opposite direction. Sorry. I know, I thought I turned that off, I didn't mind. This is looking from the other direction. All that native bush is actually QE2. We'll flip back to that when it jumps on. So the rest of the area around the river is all QE2 native blocks, so there's sort of a large riparian area. So all of these processes actually haven't decreased our productivity or the amount of product we're producing off the property, but we're increasing our sequestration, biodiversity, and hopefully those attributes of those farms, of a farm like this, will be highly valued in the future, both in the value of our product, but also we're hoping that the government regulation will start to recognise that this is probably a really good way to go as opposed to a blanket forestation. So we'll jump over to the next one. The challenges that we face, this is a clear one in terms of we're trying to do our best for our communities and our farms and our businesses, but pest control has become a huge part of our concern in our business. It's beginning to become a cost, and it's something we need to think about. If we could just pause there, sorry, go back. So basically this is a picture of our farm that we've been working through, and you can see if we move through the main river in the middle of that picture, over here, all of that area is where it's QE2 or forested, and then around the outside we have a lot of our tree plantings in different areas. Jump through to the next slide, please. And then in the high productive areas, we focus on increasing pasture production and increasing production out of the business. The whole idea is not to lose our production. Let's jump over this one. And that just gives another idea of where we've taken areas out, forested, but focus on production in the key areas. Jump over the next one. What this has resulted in for us here, and this is where we have an opportunity, if we can get the legislation right, is that even operating on and so this is data here modelled out of getting our emissions out of Overseer, and it wasn't that good when we did it, so we would probably be able to remodel through Overseer now and reduce our emissions. But what you can actually see here now is the blue line at the bottom there is our total liabilities, and the light blue. The top line is our total credits of all the forestry of our business, and the middle purple line is where it sits in between. Obviously, the far right hand side, we start to see a harvest if we want to harvest our trees. If somebody said to me, would I go and plant pines again? I'd probably say no, because if you look at the ability to move through hardwoods and things like that, we have an opportunity to continue to sequester but harvest to get high value for that wood. So there is an opportunity for our businesses to get different wood income streams, but if we can get an appropriate regulatory environment to operate in. Flip through the next one. But the most important thing, I just like chucking up a few of these slides. Don't know if it'll play, but we start to get better outcomes for our my kids here playing in summer in our river. I'm quite happy for them to swim in our water. This is an education group come out into our large riparian areas from school, looking at water quality testing, learning about farm. There's a lot of kids from town and Wellington there, and it helps us keep our communities going. And to me, that's the most important thing. I come from a long legacy, 160 years of farming in the Wairarapa, and I want to see my kids have that same opportunity to be able to continue on into the future. And so that's why we're thinking about the opportunities. And my final slide along here is, this is what I've talked about several times. I actually talked with the Green Party members about this, but like if we actually get people out talking about what we do on our farms, we're actually producing high quality, healthy, nutritious food amongst thriving biodiversity around healthy waterways that does not contribute to global warming. Thank you. I'm up. I've been told several times I'm up.
Very good work, Lee. Thank you very much. quite a few good questions here that I think people will be hanging on to, especially when they see some of those poplars and whatnot floating around and saying you can get carbon credits out of that and things like that. So keep your questions and we'll be coming. Apparently we don't produce red meat anymore. It's highly dense, nutrient-rich protein or something like that. It's red meat's got a sort of bad flavour about it, but nutrient-dense protein. That's what we're supposed to be saying we produce now. But yeah, right, moving on. Dr. John Paul Pratt from Ground Truth. He's also a Balanced Farm Environment Awards judge for Waikato. So yeah, welcome.
I think basically just do what William's done. It's true. So he's talked about a mosaic, he's got a range of species, he's talked about a range of markets. There's one thing that I would disagree with is with pines. I mean, I think they have a place in the landscape and on farms. But think of pines as the money in the bank deposit. So you've got a range of investments. You've got bank deposits, and then you've got shares, and you might have commercial property, whatever. The pine trees are your bank deposit. They are reliable. There's a market there. Infrastructure's all there. You can you can bank on that. So, but instead of having them all planted at once, like William has, not that it's his fault because he probably wasn't involved in that decision. And were they planted in '96 or '90s?
Yes.
So they jumped on the bandwagon. Excuse me, William, but you would have seen the same thing happening in the 90s in Te Kuiti, green plan planting all those trees, and now they're all coming ready for harvest. So and that's sort of what's happening now with carbon farming. And William's dead right that if you get blanket wall-to-wall pine trees, fence-to-fence pine trees, it's not a good idea. It's good for the people that are investing in those pine trees, especially at $50, $48 a tonne now in the market. That equates to an average of $1,200 per hectare cash in hand over 50 years for pine trees. You can't do that out of your lands on past 6 to 8 countries. So it stacks up from a point of view, we're talking 30 or 40% internal rate of return on some of those investments. So that's why these external investors are coming in and really rocking the boat in terms of investment in property. So the ETS has been going since 2008. So this is not new, but what's new is that we've been through the ups and downs of carbon, and now carbon seems to have become more stable in its income, and so that becomes a real option. But the companies that were involved back in the early, back in 2008, 2009, are the same ones that are involved now. So they've sort of solidified. They've got contracts to supply carbon credits to Air New Zealand or to Z Energy, BP, whoever, and that's their bread and butter. That's their job. So that's how they that's their role in life. So it's just a business decision. And so in terms of deciding whether or not Waitomo gets planted with pine trees, you guys are the ones that make that decision, as long as you own the land. So my I guess plea to you, or the message that we bring is the need to integrate profitability and resilience. So my business partner is a forestry consultant, and I'm in agricultural research. That's been my background, but I got involved in forestry 30 years ago now. Time just keeps on moving, and purely because of I got interested in it because you could make some money off land that was otherwise difficult to manage. It was a riverside on my mate's dairy farm, so he didn't want to run sheep like the previous owner, and so we planted trees on it in a joint venture under the Forestry Rights Registration Act. So that allowed me to come in. I didn't own any land. I wanted to plant trees. I wanted to grow something, and trees seemed like a good idea. And so we got into that joint venture. And so, obviously the Beethams have good knowledge in terms of forestry management. They've put the right tree in the right place, as you can see by those slides. But a lot of farmers don't necessarily have those skills. and certainly you may need to bring those skills into your business. It's not like, share it when a contractor comes and shares a sheep. You know what a fair deal is on that. The sheep's been shorn properly, no nicks, and the walls there handled properly. But if someone comes to prune or thin your pine trees, you really don't know whether they've just ripped you off or whether they've done a good job. So it's important to understand, if you don't have the skills, to bring them in to make a profitable job out of the forestry venture. So that's. But we sort of firmly believe that forestry has a part in sheep and beef farming in New Zealand in terms of in farming in general, to manage these challenges which we've got facing the farmers. We've got freshwater, we've got climate change, and we've got biodiversity, and forestry ticks all those boxes. And the key thing that William also raised was getting value out of that. So how do we get value? How do we get recognised for that in the market? And Silverspoon Farms now are selling carbon neutral beef in the States. We're talking about it. And so that, we would hope, is a premium product that we're getting some value of. A bit like Taupo beef, same sort of thing. They've addressed nitrogen or nitrate leaching issues, and they're getting a premium in the market for them. So New Zealand Inc. needs to be doing that as a group and getting recognition of the stuff that's happening on the farm. And we have these conversations all the time. So we hope that Federated farmers are working on that in terms of recognising these things on the farm. But don't think they're going to come along just through good luck. You're going to have to do the work, but also you need to be able to demonstrate that. So demonstrate in terms of the forestry or the planting that you've done. That's going to be demonstrated to the market. The market's not going to pay for something they can't see, and so it comes back to those systems, quality assurance systems, that can pick up that sort of information. So it's another hobby horse of ours, is that you can't just say, oh, we're doing a good job. You've actually got to prove it in the market, and how much better are we doing that job than our overseas competitors, in order to get a premium, or at least keep our access in the market. I've got some slides, but just flick through. Keep going, please, Chris. This is all about, we can spend a whole day on forestry, no problem at all. Climate change. Forestry is not yet, so going, stop there, look at that. So this is sort of quite an important slide in terms of ETS and profitability. You'll see that radiata and the hardwoods, which William's been talking about, have a similar profile of growth in terms of accumulation of carbon. So this is planting in the year 25, whereas native has about a third of the accumulation rate. So it's slow and steady sort of an option. And the other species like cypress and redwoods are a bit in between. So they have a longer rotation potential, and certainly redwoods can go for hundreds of years. So they're a better option for a long-term carbon. But there's no difference in the price of a carbon unit between the native and the radiata. The radiata is cheaper to establish, competes against the weeds a hell of a lot better, and will accumulate carbon 3 times the rate. So your payback is a lot quicker in terms of an investment. And it's important to make these decisions around good business. So that's an important thing to understand. The other thing is that for getting into it, so are you in the ETS with it? Yes. You are. So you've been through that process. So there's an actual registration cost involved with the ETS. There's a charge from MPI, and there'll be some work that needs to be done. You could be looking at $1,000 to $1,500 as a cost. So if you've got 3 hectares of riparian native, it's going to really struggle to pay back your investment just in terms of investing in the ETS and carbon. Whereas if you've got 8 hectares of pine trees, you'll pay it back in 1 or 2 years. So, that's the current regime. And so there is, I guess, there's some discussion around trying to lower that cost of the entry into the ETS. But the reality is that the government has to then defend what they do in New Zealand to register that 3 hectares of native to an overseas, auditor. So it's got to be a robust system, and you don't get that for nothing. So that's why there is a cost associated with it, and why there is a process involved, because it's all about demonstrating this. I'm getting told. So go, Chris, please. Go. No, go forward, sorry. So, you've got this example in your backyard. Whata around a 280 hectare catchment, and back in 2001, is that right, Mike? It was half of it was planted in pine trees, those horrible pine trees. 147 hectares planted on Class 7 and Class 6 land. So that was half of the property, half of the grazed area, and there was, the process was about water quality, really improving water quality, and but also improving the efficiency of the farm. So if you go forward another one, yeah, that's it there. So most farmers, when you talk to them about trees, they say, but you need to use every blade of grass on my farm to produce, to keep the ewes going, to produce the lambs. That's not actually true. What you need to be doing is looking at profitability of your land and looking at the different land classes, as William's done again, and look at profitability of those different land classes. So this was the live weight produced before the trees were planted, and that's after. So you can see I've planted half the farm in pine trees, and they're taking the same amount of production of live weight off that farm. So there's been no loss of productivity. They've probably reduced their stocking rate, they've increased their lamb rate, increased their lamb weights, increased wool production, and increased their beef weight. So they've improved their efficiency of their operation, and that would have actually also reduced their greenhouse gas emissions, because that's all about improving their efficiency. And the profitability, the farm surplus, also increased. So I'm not saying this is going to happen on every farm, but it's a good example of making assumptions and not doing the analysis. So, and also that area that was 147 hectares, that's going to return $1,200 per hectare per year if you average that over the lifetime of that forest. And that's coming back to what I was saying about planting in '96. If you actually stagger the planting, and so you decide to plant 50 hectares, and you plant 10 hectares every 5 years, you'll get into a rotation, and you have a 25-year rotation. Every 5 years you'll have 10 hectares that you can harvest, and then you're not into this big dips and peaks and troughs that William showed on the graph. You're into basically a consistent income from forestry. And the good thing about trees, I believe, is that you don't have to harvest them at year 25. You can actually wait until year 35, as long as you've done the management, the pruning and the silviculture correctly. So it's not like a lamb or a vat of milk, which has to go when it's ready. It's actually you can choose. You've got a 10-year window or even more. You would have heard of forestry being knocked over for 20 years now, and farmers getting involved in that. So it's got a longer window. So you can actually stretch that and manage that those peaks and troughs with the way you manage the crop. That's it.
Very good. Thanks very much, Rob. Let's give you some closing questions, isn't it? Something to think about. I hope you've got some good questions for afterwards. Next, we've got Gary Kircher, Mayor of Waitaki. The Waitaki's had quite an early, I suppose, experience into carbon farming and pine trees, so he's going to give us a bit of an insight into what's happened in his neck of the woods.
Thanks, Chris. Good evening, everybody. Gary Kircher here for Waitaki. Most of you know that south of here, Waitaki district, 7,000 square kilometres, just over double the size of Waitomo, and population is about 24,000 residents, and then we obviously have very many visitors coming through all the time. We're neighbours with Waimate district, Mackenzie, Westland, Queenstown Lakes, Central Otago, and Dunedin City. So that'll hopefully tell you where we are. Our main town's Wangaroo, and we've got a lot of small towns, but 13,000 to 14,000 people in Wangaroo. Still very much a largely agricultural district, and there's a lot of industry in Wangaroo is based on agriculture. So what happens on farms is very important to us. The challenge that we've had over time is some of the negative impacts of carbon forestry, and so I just want to go into some of those. So next slide, please. As you go on to the couple. So without I hope this comes up in time. Can you just try arrowing across? Yeah, on the arrow on the keyboard. Well, I can see what I'm looking at anyway. So carbon forestry in itself isn't a bad thing, but the experiences we've had with it are bad. We certainly believe right tree in the right place is very important, as has been mentioned. But what we've had is, although carbon forestry is generally restricted to class 6 to 8, as has also been mentioned. Next one, sorry. Yep. Excellent. Obviously employed you good looks. Yeah. So the challenge for us has been where these have been planted and how they've been planted. It's certainly becoming more common around New Zealand, and there's quite a few districts are getting more and more impacted by them, and both the economic impact of it and the social impact as well. It's not easy to regulate in that there isn't any yes for plantation forestry, but there's not one for carbon forestry, and that creates some issues. And there's no standard definition for carbon farming, so that when you talk about carbon farming, you've actually got to actually come up with your own definition if you're creating, as a council, creating any rules around it. Generally speaking, what our last speaker talked about was planting part of your farm, and that is absolutely fine. It's the overall buying up the farm, planting out the whole thing, the monoculture of pine trees, which is we see as very bad, and it certainly is what is being encouraged by central government at the moment with and obviously by the EGS, because of the carrots that are put out there for investors to go and buy up farms and plant out the whole farm. So there's quite a lot of legislation that has to be considered around, when we're looking at any rules around this. Obviously some of the things coming from central government are around climate change and the need to plant a whole lot more trees, the Billion Tree Program and the enthusiasm that was entered into, the New Zealand First brought that out and they were looking for land anywhere to stick trees on. And yeah, some of the other things mentioned there. So if we just move on to the next one. One of the inequities in this is the disproportionate effect that it has on rural communities. Agriculture gets blamed for emissions a lot, but generally those emissions are more around methane. Carbon is more around transport and some of those other uses like that. But to meet that challenge and to sequester the carbon, that's happening in rural areas. I don't think we're going to see any pine forests being planted in Northland or Wellington very soon. So that's one of the inequities that comes out of that. The other is the loss of productive land. If a whole farm is bought up, one of the first things that goes is the house or houses on it. They don't have people living on the farms. The farms get planted out, and often that is pretty much close to all that happens on them. Our experience has been that there's been very little predator control, very little maintenance of fences, because trees don't tend to wander out of the paddocks they're planted in. And so you've got this ongoing impact on the economy, on employment locally, and all those service industries that don't actually end up doing anything on that farm because there's nothing to be done. The adjacent land issues for neighbours are around the pest species and so on that get out of there, whether it's plant pests or animal pests, so pigs, deer, possums, so forth. Carbon foresters will say, well, they probably came off the farms in the first place, but the carbon forests actually provide a really good habitat, and a very safe habitat for them to go into and breed and so forth. So it definitely is a problem there. Setbacks from neighbours is another one of the issues that if those setbacks aren't maintained, it just increases the fire risk to neighbours. It increases the chances of trees falling over and fences being damaged and so forth. So there's a number of issues around that. Sorry to be so negative after the positive speaking that we've got on before here. Wilding trees for areas like ours, wildings are a major problem. Part of our district is the Mackenzie Basin, or some of the Mackenzie Basin, along with the Mackenzie District sharing that. And you may be aware of just how major the wilding tree problem has been. Some of the land that these carbon forests are being planted on have had wildings cleared off them, and now being planted out with pine trees. And the chance of them spreading to neighbours again is an issue. So it becomes a problem, a major problem there. The fire risk, even if fire breaks are there and are maintained, and setbacks are there and are maintained, we're talking about environments where winds of 120 to 150, 160 kilometres an hour happen. So that's definitely a problem. Next slide. So we've sought some legal opinions around what can be done, because we've got our community saying we need to stop this or at least control this, and the legal opinions have come back and said, yes, we can do things like plan change. That would cost us $100,000 or so. There's very strong likelihood we will need to defend that through to the Environment Court, and that's starting to talk about $1 million or $2 million and so on. So council like ours is, it's just not something that we can really contemplate. And so that's where council's getting together and lobbying starts becoming more of an important thing. So our direct experience, we had a farm bought up, Fairview. It's about 1,200 hectares, and a resource consent was applied for in 2013, I believe. That we sent back the draft consent with conditions, and didn't hear anything more. The staff that were there at the time aren't there, so we don't know exactly some of the detail that happened, but somewhere along the line anyway, they the New Zealand Carbon Farming went ahead and planted anyway. They didn't respect the setbacks, they didn't respect the fire breaks and so forth, so there was some major issues. Eventually, when we did find out about it, for some reason we didn't do anything about it. Possibly, I'm assuming, we thought, it's trees, how bad can they be? But they did turn out to be quite bad. One of the challenges was in 4th of October last year, on exactly the same night that the Lake Oakhow Village fire started, there was a fire started on this place as well. So fire swept through. It was over 600 hectares were burned, mostly on this property. It came very close to burning Neighbours properties, and it was very much a very, very scary experience for the people involved. It took a lot of firefighting, helicopters and so forth to eventually put it out. Since that time, they've done a bit of clean up, and so this slide here just shows they've cleared some of the trees. Look, some of those trees, the fir trees, are still standing. They're just planting in between them and leaving it back. Bulldozed a bit of a setback to be a bit more compliant, but basically going with existing use rights. When they bought the farm next door, the same company bought Hazeldean, which is 2,500 hectares. That's where the community really got pretty wild about the whole situation. It's a lot of work's been done on possum control and so on. You can see on the farm photo there the regeneration of a lot of indigenous vegetation, and it's actually become a very special environment. And it's a very, very big, very deep valley here in the headwaters of the Kakanui, where there's got some rare galactids and so forth in there, and they're now planning to plant 1,500 hectares of that in pine trees, and the impact on that environment is not going to be great. So far, our community has held a public meeting with around 150 people at it. We as council held one with a similar number of people there. There's a lot of interest in what's going on, a lot of concern about what's going on. And again, it comes back to just these are not the right trees in the right place. It's not the right way to do things. The impact on the community is just too great, and the controls that we've got are too limited. So we're working away trying to sort that out. We're working with a number of other councils, particularly around Hawke's Bay. Certainly met with Waitomo and Okarahanga today, and we'll see whether they want to join in on basically funding a lobby voice in Wellington to actually get in there and talk to the politicians and say, look, this needs to be done, but it needs to be done right, because at the moment it's sure as you could. That'll be for me. Thank you.
Very good, thank you very much, Derek. Right. Questions? You're all full of questions. I imagine. Anyone want to? Andre, we'll let you start.
Yeah, I find that a lot of these figures are quite misleading, because you can make quite a good story in planting trees and have carbon for the first 40 years. If you're not going to harvest them, then really you've lost your farm, you've lost that land, and you cannot reclaim on carbon once that carbon has been produced off that particular block of land. That's it, and you cannot cut them down and replant and carry on claiming carbon, as I understand it.
Yes.
That's true, but it's still the choice of the landowners to how they approach it. So we wouldn't actually advocate just planting a crop for carbon, because who knows what the market will be for carbon in 40 or 50 years' time, even 25 years' time. So you need to be thinking about multiple products from your land, timber and carbon. As soon as you go down that route, you're very much locked into it. And that's fine for New Zealand carbon farming, that's what their business is, and that's the risk that they take. But for a farmer with, I wouldn't suggest necessarily going down that route. But if you were, it's quite an attractive option for difficult areas at the back of the farm which you might not be able to harvest. So, but if you're going to do that, it might be better to have a species like redwood or Totra, which are a long-term species which will be there for and keep sequestering carbon for forever and a day, to some point. So the current tables go out to 50 years in terms of their carbon sequestration, but it would be better if you have a range of products from your land, not just one. But you're right about you only get one, like in terms of if you were to plant pine forest or another forest, pines are a good example, and go into the new regime is called averaging, in which case you can take the average of that of the carbon accumulated on that site and then harvest and continue to harvest, but there's no more carbon available for that site, as opposed to having a permanent forest which will carry on sequestering carbon. So, you just want to have options up your sleeve, so don't just put the trees in and walk away and forget about them. Manage them as if you're going to get some sort of timber return from them, thin them, maybe prune them if you can, and think about access. There's no point in spending a lot of money on a small block of pines at the back of the farm, because you'll end up, they will be just carbon because it'll be too expensive to harvest them. So you need to do the planning at the beginning. You almost need to come up with a harvest plan before you actually start planting.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good point, is that we've got to remember that the carbon market, and this is one of the failures, we could say that it was a failure from the start, but is that it's a market designed to fail, right? So you're sequestering carbon and it becomes so expensive to buy carbon that you stop using fossil fuels. So that's the way it's supposed to. So the realisation is that eventually carbon will be worth nothing. So if you've got your land locked into that and you're concerned about your communities and intergenerational land management, then your plan, I agree, your plan should be about, okay, you can sequester carbon, and that is an issue for our industry right now, and there's the reality around emissions, and then there's where the policy sits, and we've got to work really hard, but the actual long-term opportunity is around how do we improve the outcomes for our communities, whether it's water, whether reducing erosion, whether having different diversification in terms of products on our farms. And if there's one thing I wish I'd done 10 years ago, and sat down on our farm and actually said, well, reading the tea leaves a little bit, what would our 30-year plan look like for our farming business? And what are the challenges going to come forward? Because a lot of the challenges we face now are on, and how can we be on the front foot and make money out of that? And we're an intergenerational farming business, so I'm just employed by the business, and it's about how do we ensure that it survives for another 160 years. And that's the way we are trying to approach what we do in our farm and in our farm business. And we want to create value for that over the long term. And so there's a lot of opportunities if we get the mix right, I think.
I sort of see carbon as an opportunity to get into another land use space. It gives you an income to do that land use change, and then flip it from maybe just a pure sheep and beef farm to a farm that produces forestry products and sheep and beef, so that you can finance your way into that rather than having to take a risk. Because that's the problem with forestry, is that it's a 28-year investment. You've got to put the money in front, and you've got to take a risk that you're going to get it back in 28 years' time. With carbon, it allows you to do that transition and actually make money and pay for that investment earlier. So the payoff period is a lot quicker. So your return on investment is better than it has been. So, but it sort of facilitates that change in land use.
The point I was making though is when you get to your 30 years, you're obliged to replant that land in trees to keep that carbon being produced ad infinitum, but you cannot claim any more finance on it.
No, that's true, it's true, but you've had the income from it, whereas, and it's hasn't been available in the past.
That's
One
what you grandkids.
of the challenges we've had is to try and get in front of ministers on this stuff, and Minister Short and Minister Parker weren't able to come to our meeting. We haven't been able to meet with them, although we finally will be meeting with Minister Short in a couple of weeks. So we did meet with Scott Simpson, who's opposition spokesperson for the environment, and you know what he said is basically this is a plan for 50 years, and by that time we will have decarbonised the economy, whatever that might look like. So they aren't looking past that for carbon, and at that stage I imagine you can cut the trees down or later, not necessarily keep them there, but it's about trying to soak up that carbon over that 50 years.
Yeah, so the current regime, if you like, is that if you were to cut those trees down and wanted to put it back on grass, you have to pay back credits at the price they are. But if carbon goes out of the economy, which I'm yet to believe it will, but if it does, then the price of carbon will be zero. It'll be gone. And so therefore paying back the emissions won't be a problem. Unless, of course, the government changes the regulations as well.
How do they calculate the money, the sequestering of carbon on a pine tree vis-a-vis an acre? In other words, you're saying that it's far more profitable to do it in pines. It's quicker. What about incentivising more native? Because after, if you
This man is going to talk to that man.
okay, if you talk like William's talking about and take a generational approach, natives and regenerative, selective milling within 80 years, and it's creating the future instead of just all going to happen now. Pines.
I think though that we need to understand there are other options besides pine trees and that's the redwoods, the cypress, the hardwoods, the eucalypts, which have a 30 to 40 year or shorter, but it can provide us alternative products. So cypress, for example, Macrocarpus tannica, redwoods, finishing timber.
So can you incentivise those to make them as profitable as pine?
Well, now you're talking about interfering with the market.
Exactly. Well, the government are interfering and they've created this carbon. It's a man-created situation.
Careful what you push for.
But surely you can fine-tune it a bit?
Well, you can, but sort of, so I'll come back to my point about the bank deposit. There's a whole infrastructure around pine trees, planting, harvesting, and marketing, big end marketing. Whereas the alternative species are more difficult. There isn't the established markets. They tend to be niche markets. What you need to do is change the whole system so that everybody has to build with wood, and then they'll be building with some of these alternative timbers and create a market for it. That will create a more a better return for it, and you'll get migration to those species. So it's all about the mighty dollar, unfortunately. I mean, you could also there's discussion around native bush, and you've got native bush on your farm. You've just put a fence around it, deer fence. You've got deer out, you've got pigs, goats, everything out of it, possums, the rest of it, and so you've improved the biodiversity on the farm. And you've actually you'll increase the biomass on that in that zone as well. And so, how do is there a way to get some carbon credits for that? And it might be, we'll say 1 or 2 tonnes per hectare per year, but it's going to be a long-term gain, and it incentivises that pest control and on that site, and so that's another sort of a mechanism to improve the biodiversity. And if you had you've got carbon credits, we all understand that. And nitrogen credits are another thing. Taupo, that's how Taupo got tired of that land, nitrogen credits. Maybe there's some biodiversity credits that can be magicked up by the government and paid for to incentivise the protection of existing native and establishment of more market.
Chris?
There has to be a market mechanism. Farmers aren't going to do nothing for nothing.
Our question is, you've got two government policies and pines here, and one's based on the New Zealand government, which is around discretion and climate change. Then you've got another policy that